Transformation briefing note that's been put out by the Health Secretary at Anishinabek. And this book you received, it's a copy of the way the BC First Nation governance model was put together. And this is the document, this is the model that we're going after. And we're going to try, we've already had preliminary discussions with the chairman of the BC Health Authority, and I've had discussions with the whole board out there, and we will be having a visit from the chairman in July. But the problem right now that we've got to get some more information out on the process, the structure, historical structure, and how this all started. And we intend to bring that back to our health teams and make sure they're fully updated and have an understanding and answer any possible questions they may have prior to our next meeting coming up. And I have an invitation to go out there and meet with the Grand Chief, so I'll be going out, meeting with him, Grand Chief Doug Kelly, as soon as possible. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I think everybody's heard the statement that the province of Ontario will be moving onward after the next election. I would suspect there may be a change in the government, and this particular initiative is determinant on the fact the Ontario government is still supportive along with us, and the federal government will join them if we can maintain the structure and get a number of communities in our organization committed to following this path. I think it'll give us a better overall picture of health in our communities, and the services that we can provide to our members will be drastically increased. There'll be no more non-insured health branch. We'll be taking over the administration of the health services for our people, so there won't be denials on eyeglasses, on the teeth, and those types of things. We intend to hire First Nation doctors and professionals to be the ones that'll be running our health department. So what we're trying to do is give total control over the health system to our people so that we are making the best decisions, and these boards will be the ones that will be determining how those are set up, and we'll have to structure health boards in each area and make one major board for the whole Union Territory. So that's the plan going forward, that we will have representatives up in the Thunder Bay, down around the Sioux, and around the North Bay area over to the east. So the Superior or the east doesn't get left out, and we'll have one in the southwest, and probably the head office will be where the chairman of our health authority will be reporting and working with the Anishinabek Nation offices. So that's our plan going forward, and I hope you can understand this plan is it's new for us going down in this direction, but I think you've also heard that the North Shore Tribal Council has had some success in dealing with this health process, and we look strongly to that area for the applications and how they deal with the health, and so that we don't lose any aspects of some of the models that have been worked on within the Anishinabek territory. And it'll be our model that we create, and if there's any questions, I'll be try to answer them for you. So, anybody? I don't see no questions. I only got a couple minutes here, so I'm rushing things. So, and this plan is well underway. We already have had an excursion out there. Myself and Jamie went out and met with their whole health team and some of our health directors as well. If you don't have any questions, I guess I'll turn things over to Jamie. He can look after the second part here of our processes dealing with the mental health section.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank you first for allowing us some time on the agenda to bring this issue forward to you. In your packages, we provided an overview that we received from the Chiefs of Ontario. This discussion on the mental health wellness teams has been taking place across the whole province through all of the PTOs. And what we've been asked is to bring the issue to you, the Chiefs in Assembly here, so that we can bring forward an Anishinabek position or preferred approach to the mental health, wellness, and the crisis response teams. So I provided a very short PowerPoint presentation here. So there's been two different pots of funding that's been announced, one from the federal government and one from the province. There's been discussions on how we can proceed to best address the needs of mental health, wellness, and crisis response across the province. Through these funding pots that we have, as I mentioned there and what's in your notes, for the federal funding that's been provided, their funding is specific to these mental health wellness teams and the crisis response teams. Those are the two areas that the federal funding is applicable to. The province came in following the federal announcement and announced that they would match the funds that the feds had put forward, so long as the funds went to the mental health, wellness, and crisis response teams. So if we're looking at total numbers, there's $5 million that the feds have put forward, and the province matched that $5 million as well, for a total of $10 million in total over the next 2 years. And they have committed verbally to moving forward as well with additional funding for 1920 and beyond that. So we have those funds available to us. In the package you have and in the resolution that's been provided to you, there are three options to utilize these funds. So the first option that we have are 20 mental wellness teams across the province of Ontario. These teams would be performing the dual role of mental wellness and crisis response. What we feel through these 20 teams is that it would provide some continuity with our communities. So the 20 teams across Ontario would work with between 5 and 10 communities, depending on the geographical location of them, to develop mental health capacity, provide mental wellness services, crisis prevention and responses, as well as intervention. And the ultimate end goal in this option is for these teams to develop and build community capacity so that in 2019 and 2020 and beyond, these funds can be flowed directly to the communities with the capacity in place. And that would strengthen coordinated systems and strengthen community-based services, as I mentioned, within 3 to 4 years, and 2019, 20, and beyond. From HCU, in some of our discussions that we've had, this is probably the preferred approach, as it, as I mentioned, gives continuity. It gives the same faces to our community members who need these mental health and wellness services. And it introduces new human resource capacity to our communities to deal with these mental health issues. We looked at a very preliminary breakdown of these teams. I mentioned there'd be 20 within the province overall. If we look at First Nation numbers within the PTOs and population within the PTOs, a general breakdown could look like this, and I'll say could because we have to finalize it, but within our territory here, we'd be looking at 7 new teams within our 40 communities that we have. So we'd be at about the six communities per team range, which I think is a fairly positive ratio. I have some asterisks beside NAN because they actually do have 2 teams currently in place there. and Grand Council Treaty 3 has one team in place as we speak. So what we're looking at is to try to get these decisions into the Chiefs of Ontario and to bring our position as the Anishinabek Nation forward at their assembly so that we can get the rest of these teams rolled out if we do move with the option 1 position. Option 2, and this is going back to the original proposal that we received from FNIB Ontario region at Health Canada, was to have only 2 mental health crisis teams and 6 mental health wellness teams across the whole province. So these 2 teams would service any of the communities, all 133, when there are crises that arrive. So we kind of move away from that intimate relationship between the teams, where it's more of a broad approach. And if there are more than 2 communities that are in crisis, then we'd have to look at other options and how we can support those communities. Another note is the 6 mental wellness teams would target and provide coverage to the most at-risk communities, with a particular focus on rural, remote, and northern communities. And I know we've had some discussions in the past about services across the entire province and not necessarily focused on the north or the far north. And I think, again, going to option 1, that's something where it's more of a shared approach and rollout of services. Under option 2, with the provincial funding, they would roll out the life promotion holistic response funding directly to First Nations through the PTO in a flow-through manner. So if we look at their 5 million and we break it down to 133 communities, it's significantly less in terms of having someone full-time within your communities. Math-wise, I don't know if we'd even have a permanent full-time person for salaries and wages in addition to any other expenses that they'd have. So again, it does provide funding directly to the community, but it is in a little bit less capacity than the services that could be provided through option 1. And the third option is a blend of those first 2 options. There is an opportunity for the PTOs to decide amongst themselves what approach they'd like to take. If it is option 1 that they'd like to move forward with, but we can't come to a full consensus at the Chiefs of Ontario Assembly, then we could move forward as our own communities with option 1 and have the mental wellness teams in place. And then the remainder of PTOs who choose not to have the jointly funded teams would receive, as explained earlier, the MCYS funding would go directly to the communities, and they would have to then fall under the original FNIB Ontario region model of having the 1 mental health crisis response team and whatever number of the 6 mental wellness teams that still remain based on the amount of PTOs that buy into option 1. So we have before us those 3 options. Certainly open the floor for discussion, and what the outcome that we're hoping for and through the resolution that's been provided to each of you is to come to an Anishinabek approved approach on how we want to address the mental health wellness and the mental health crisis response teams. So I'd open the floor for any discussion or questions, and looking forward to our discussion and our decision on whether we're going with option 1, 2, or 3.
Bonjour. Chief Mel Hardy from Pidgewabbegzagi, Anishinabek. Also former band of McDermott and McIntyre Bay. I do support this initiative because I found that when we had a crisis, we had since January of 2016 till April of 2017, we had 10 people dying in our community. We had a crisis, and I think Jamie was part of that. I want to say miigwech for the assistance when we had to go through and come up with some kind of initiative that we can respond to crisis effectively without affecting our standard delivery service on our First Nations. So we had to go through this. And some of the issues I found was going through this is as I was watching and seeing how things were being coordinated. And I definitely, whatever the process is going to be, that there has to be a criteria or a framework where these people that come from all of our communities, because what I found when this team came up, sure, they were there, but they ended up being cooks. They ended up being the cleaners, as opposed to trying to get them reestablished to engage with our First Nation members, and they didn't know them. And they were just delivering food, and we are trying to get them to engage with our people, but I think that it was because of the lack of familiarity with our First Nation people, our ways. They found it somewhat difficult to engage with our people, so we try to encourage them to do that. So what I found within that is that that option 3, and I don't know, Jamie, is this going to be, those options going to be preferential for the First Nations to pick either or the options?
Sorry, what was the question?
Like, you know, when we talk about these options, you're talking about number 6, you talk about the options 1, 2, 3. Is that a either or, take it or leave it? Can we pick 1, 2, or 3, or what? I need to be
Yeah, what we've been asked is through discussion with the other PTOs and with leadership at the Chiefs Committee on Health and at the Health Coordination Unit, these are the 3 options. The federal funding, like I mentioned, has to be tied to these teams. There has to be teams developed through the federal funding.
I understand that. I understand. I'm not stupid. Yeah. I do know that. But what I'm saying is that I guess just for this initiative of understanding this whole process, because I lived through this process, and I found that if you bring people in, which is great for resources, but the First Nation, I found our First Nation had to lead that initiative, because we lost up to 75% of capacity for our workers to be able to deliver this program. I think another thing to consider within this process is, and I was just talking to another chief from Northern Superior, is when our youth has mental health issues, right? And we have to they got to be formed out of our community for assessment. They ended up going to, usually they end up going to a adult mental health facility where it puts them at a disposition, because most times they end up being isolated and they get out of there, and more times than many they end up getting worse or becoming suicidal ideation. So within this initiative, and what I've asked for since the get-go is to have access to our own professionals, not being brought from these other facilities. So somebody that can work with us, know First Nations, and be able to connect directly with the First Nations and be part of the crisis team as well, and not just go to the hospital, because that's where we lose a lot of members. So, but I do support this initiative. I just want to say that, because I think if it's well developed and it's actually not painted with one brush like a child welfare Children's Aid Society does, I'd like to be able to I advocate this as well. Miigwech.
Thank you. Just in response to the chief, I think if you look at the option 1 with the teams that we talked about, and we'd have a number of regional teams that would be throughout the Anishinabek territory, that's where you'd have that kind of suite of services that you're talking about, and developing those relationships with your community members, where it could include clinical psychiatrists, psychologists, registered social workers, nurses, elders, spiritual advisors, outreach workers could all be included in those teams that are developed. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have when we have crisis response, but also when we talk about mental wellness as well, is developing those relationships with the professionals who provide the services to our community members, where it's not strangers flying in for a week or 2 weeks and then they're gone. These teams would provide that continuity and that relationship building with our citizens.
Miigwech, but I thought that was what the hybrid option would consist of as well, is the variety of that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Miigwech.
Chief Duncan Machano from Beek-Gang. I guess this initiative deals with some of the issues in our communities. However, when there's mental health issues, either because of alcohol or drugs or chemical imbalances in the young person's brain, they're not dealt with fully on the reserve or on the community. They at some point have to go to the hospital. And at the hospitals, there's shortfalls in regards to their capabilities to deal with mental health people, period. Not just Anishinabek patients, but mental health patients, period. They have medical doctors at the local hospitals, and those medical doctors are not trained to deal with mental health patients. They try to do assessments, but they're not trained to do that. What we need at the local level is psychologists, or at least quick access to psychologists and or psychiatrists to make an assessment. Once the assessment is done, in our region they go to Thunder Bay. And in Thunder Bay for youth, there are 8 beds in an area from Wawa to the Manitoba border, from the United States border to James Bay. All those communities, there are 8 youth beds. So that youth, when they are assessed as being at risk in the hospital by a medical doctor, not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, have to stay in that hospital in conditions that are not conducive for a person with mental health issues. So there's issues there. In regards to a thing that, an issue that Chief Hardy mentioned in regards to youth also, once they turn 16, they are placed in an adult facility. And in those adult facilities in Thunder Bay, there are no programs for those kids. They are dealt with like an adult. And it's pretty damn demeaning for a 16-year-old kid to be placed in with adults. They need to be in youth facilities where there are programs for youth. So those are issues that Alma Wells, who is our mental health worker, and I are dealing with. I've got personal experience with this because I've got granddaughters who have gone through that system. And it was pretty damn stressful for me to see those kids going through that issue. Because once they're off our community, there are issues also. There are shortfalls. Because the system, and that's something I think that we have to make the Ontario government aware of. That's something that we have to work with the LHINs and the municipalities also to make sure that there's enough resources at those local hospitals. So when the kids come from our communities, they have facilities that they can be dealt with. Igor.
Chief, I'd like to acknowledge what you said, and you know, mental health is an extremely important issue that we have to take full understanding and full control of, because what you're saying is really true, that facilities aren't designed for 16-year-old or young people. They're not conducive to the type of services. I think that that's why they're in need of, and I think that's why what we're recommending here and is number 3, because it gives us the option of putting health teams together to assess and to be able to act and respond to these issues when they come to hand, so that if we do go down the road of health transformation and we get control of the budget, we'll be able to directly deal with these things. Because right now we don't have access to public health and other health services that other Canadians do. So when we take this over, I know I talked to the folks in BC, it gives them more authority over the health issues and what their money's spent on, instead of denying services, trying to save money. We're trying to save lives and improve the health conditions of our people. So if we have these health teams, we can put and work together with the mental health teams, and definitely I believe we'll put a better perspective out there for our people to have better access to health care. That's why we're recommending going to us taking this over, because all the years other people have managed our health concerns, they have not done it with the same desire we have, is to get good health. Theirs is about budgets and about money, and they don't really focus on our people, I think, the way that we would. So that's what I'm recommending for motion number 3 there, the options anyway. Chief?
Hello, Chief Johnson, Servan River. I appreciate your response. I was confused in regards to what option you were proposing, because I heard 1 and then I wasn't sure, because when I'm looking at this is going to the Chiefs of Ontario meeting next week.
Yeah.
And then if we don't agree, is what I'm hearing you say, if there's no consensus on the floor, then we would have to go with option 2. Is that what I'm understanding?
Oh, what my understanding, and the Grand Chief has already made a comment that the union will be pursuing going after this health transformation, much like the BC model. We're pursuing that road. And when we do, this thing won't be an option 2. It'll be one of the items on a table for us to negotiate with the federal government, because it requires federal, provincial, and also representatives in public health to come in and clarify what kind of services they provide and what we have access to. And that's why option number 3 is being recommended, because it breaks it down into areas, like area health board would service the First Nations in that catchment area, and they would be the ones that would be dealing with this. I know it'll get shot down at the Chiefs of Ontario, and there'll be one pushing more stuff what Nan wants, but that's our politics here in the region, and that's the way we've had to move forward as we've ventured forward on things like this.
So I'm just going to make a comment, like what you're talking about is health transformation, and that's going to take a while. My concern is that we have needs in the community now and can't wait for 1 or 2 years. So that's why I'm concerned, because I agree with the previous chiefs that youth mental health, children's mental health is really lacking in our communities, in all of our communities. And so I'm just trying to understand which option, because you're talking about health transformation, but that's not going to happen in the next year. Like, we're going to have discussions with the government, but so I need to understand how quickly this will happen and what's the best route for our communities. So, because I heard Jamie say option 1, which was, that we would have guaranteed for the PTO. So that's why I'm a little unclear, because we have to make a decision. This money is going to flow, and it can't wait until we have these discussions on health transformation.
Hi, Chief. In terms of timelines, we're looking at this piece here, aside from the health transformation, but just on the mental health issue, we're looking at getting a decision in by the 1st of July and have everything drawn up and roll out into the communities, hopefully by the early fall, late summer, early fall. The feds and the province are both committed with their funding. They're just waiting for us to give them direction on what we'd like to see. So this isn't going to be a drawn-out process. It is something that's going to be on the ground in very short order to get these either teams or the hybrid model out and providing services to our communities. The number 3 model, like I mentioned, it's a hybrid of 1 and 2. So if we decide to go with the mental health teams as a PTO, we can do that. Or if we want to go with that mix of teams and the direct funding to the communities for youth mental health issues, we can do that. So I think the flexibility is in number 3. The broader approach to have those full integration of mental health teams is in number 1. So that's up to you. And you were correct when you said option 2. If there is no decision, the feds are going to move forward with the 2 crisis response teams and the 6 mental health teams across the whole province. And the funding from MCYS would then flow directly to the communities.
So I guess that's where I'm asking for clarification, because if we go to Lac Seul next week and NAN says they want option 1 and we say option 3, then what will happen?
I think what would happen is that option 3 would be engaged, because NAN could go with the first part of the hybrid, which is their teams. So they'd be provided with a proportionate amount of funding to implement the teams within their region. And then if we go with number 3, where it's the blend of the 2, then we'd be provided with the funds to implement both of those approaches to it.
Okay, miigwech for that clarification.
There's one more, Chief. Or 2.
Bonjour. My name is Veronica Wabus, and I'm from Long Lake Reserve 58. We're going to have to go through, in order for us to understand these options, we're going to have to go through them. Like, it's hard to understand, because we've been waiting for, I've been waiting for mental health in my community with our young people, with our adults. Our people are going to Thunder Bay for mental health, and they're using our medical van, and we're always in deficit. We have to do it because they are getting help. And if we could, if you're saying that the teams are going to come to our First Nation, that would be a big help, because I agree with all the other chiefs that were talking about the youth, the crisis, the suicide. We had one here not too long ago getting on, she was just in our reserve, and next thing you know, she was in Winnipeg. She was lost over there. She was supposed to be going to a home to get help of her addiction. The father had to go there. They finally found her, thank God. Now she's in a home getting help. We don't have any place to send our youth that are addicted, that have these kind of problems. There's that kind of thing they call speed that's there now, and that's come to our First Nations. And that's where we need all the help that we could. So that what I'm asking is for more clarification on 1, 2, or 3. I don't know if I could decide today which option I want to take. Miigwech.
Anin Phyllis Williams, I'm the Chief of Curve Lake First Nation. I just want to ensure that we're not compromising any of the funding that we're already getting in our First Nations. In our area, the Southeast area, I am the Southeast Chiefs Committee on Health representative. And recently I've been very, I was advocating very hard to ensure that our communities have a mental health worker in each of the communities. I succeeded. And that funding is coming from LINS, however. You know, I know it's one of our enemies, but it is base funding, so it's really something that we've been fighting hard to get, and I don't want to, diminish the capacity that we need in each of our communities. So I take I'm just kind of nervous about all of that, especially when we're dealing with the province and the funds that are there. I like the idea of a crisis team because it levels the playing field. Many times, crisis teams are so busy that their concentration is in the northern communities. But, you know, we have issues too in the south. So I think for me and for my area, it would level the playing field. It would provide us with the capacity that we sometimes need. It also provides for the services that are culturally appropriate. They understand our history. They understand our people. So to me, it's really, really important that we have that. What it is equity for us in the South. Miigwech.
I want to thank both chiefs for your comments and your questions. I'll try to provide answers to them both. First, to the funding question. What we've been told and what we understand is that the funding from the FNIB and from MCYS is new funding under a new program, and it won't impact any services that exist within the communities right now. So moving forward with any of these options isn't going to diminish what you have within your communities. It's intended to build more capacity for the communities across the whole province. For clarity on the options, I guess what I can provide is if it is number one, as I mentioned, is 20 teams across the province with an average anywhere from 5 to 10, depending on geography of communities, that these teams would provide services to over and above what exists within the communities now. They would be mobile, so when they're not responding to crises, they would be working with the communities to build capacity to service citizens through whichever services they offer on a regular basis, and build that capacity within the communities, with the vision that down the road these funds would be then forwarded directly to the First Nations because they'd have that increased and built capacity within them. For the option two, again, 2 crisis teams to cover all 133 First Nations in the province, and 6 mental wellness teams, again, to cover all the communities in the province. So you're moving away from the 1 to 6, 1 to 7 ratio to a 1 to 20, 1 to 25 ratio in terms of where these teams would be supportive. Again, in what the information that we've received, those 6 mental wellness teams would also be focused on the higher need communities. So, often we know where some of those funds and those teams are directed to when it's that situation. And then going to the third option, it would be within the PTO's discretion as to how many mental wellness teams we'd like, and then for those teams they'd be within the region, and we'd be subject to the 1 crisis response team from FNIB, and that's generally what the explanation is for them. So I guess within 3 you do have the flexibility still remaining here within, and number 1 is having that broader approach with the more lowered ratio in terms of teams to communities.
Look at that. Option 2 will be implemented if we don't make a decision.
Yeah.
They need to know that.
Yeah. And as Chief just mentioned here, and I think it was mentioned by Chief Johnson as well, if there is no decision made, it would revert to the option 2 that's there, where FNIB would implement their funds as they've identified with the 2 crisis teams and the 6 mental wellness teams, and MCYS would roll out the funding directly to the communities on a I think it's the family wellness or family well-being model of funding distribution.
Bonjour, Chief Hardy, Rocky Bay. Hey, I just want to clarify, number 3 means that it's First Nation driven, right? That's all you're saying? Because the way you said, Jamie, I know you're a good guy and everything, you mean well, but how it's coming out is very confusing. I think that's just the issue, but we talk about Chinook the Gay one here, right? Let's say number 3, that's what that's all about. We have more control, more access, and when we get extra funds from INAC and from Health Canada, All they did was make amendments to our agreements. That's all they did. There was no, we didn't lose no money or nothing like that. So just, if you talk plain English like that, I think people would take it more easier. But I think it's great, Miigwech.
So I'm recommending number 3. Angus, go ahead.
Ani bojo the man mark the deck gig on deck any and they go chechaki and dodem. The Grand Chief spoke about being at a health forum about a week or so ago, and we presented as North Shore Tribal Council our 7 communities and the work that we're doing in areas of health, and mental health is a part of our health services that we provide. And what we're wanting to ensure is that we continue to build that capacity at the community level with our 7 communities, and we continue to assist in the coordination, the facilitation. So I'm not sure which one fits us best, because it's hard to tell. But the question that I had is that one of our communities is currently getting resourcing for mental health. And I'm just wanting to ensure that they are not negatively impacted, or they're going to get a reduction in the particular project or initiative that they have going. So I don't know which one or how that's going to impact some of the current resourcing that is going right to the communities.
Thank you, Angus. Just to answer your question, the community that's receiving the funding right now is through Oz. It's a mental health demonstration project, and it's a 5-year project. And I think they're just starting their 3rd year now. It wouldn't impact that at all. It's a totally separate process. And we actually have started discussions with the community to talk about how we're going to move forward with that once the 5-year pilot is done, and how we can support them. So it wouldn't impact that at all.
There's no intent to drop any of their programming they've been working on.
No. Yeah, and that's something that Grand Chief mentioned, and Chief Brissett as well, is we've had meetings, we've had an opportunity to go to meet with the North Shore Tribal Council and their health branch there, and they are doing a lot of innovative and proactive things in the area of health. And when we talk about health transformation, that's where we're looking as being the health leaders within the communities to share what they're doing, so we can take that to other communities and grow as a nation together.
Chief Johnson, Serpent River. So based on what you're telling me, and I'm just going to encourage, the chiefs here, is that maybe we need to go with option 3 as recommended, because it sounds to me like that's the best approach. Then we would have more say in regards to how the Anishinabek Nation proceeds on this. So I agree with your recommendation.
Miigwech. So resolution for mental health funding enhancements to establish mental health teams for mental wellness and crisis response teams. So it's moved by Chief Phyllis Williams, and it's seconded by Chief Tom Brissett. A number of whereases from 1 to 6. And therefore be it resolved that we, the Chiefs in Assembly, support the implementation of option 3 as the Anishinabek Nation position on mental health, funding enhancements to establish mental health teams for mental wellness and crisis response teams, and that this decision will be forwarded to the Chiefs of Ontario. So it's been moved and seconded. It's been moved. Questions called. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Carried. Miigwech. I'm going to invite Chief McLeod to do the presentation on Canada 150. We're going to ask Martin to get ready with the restoration on jurisdiction, and then we're going to go and do the economic interests.
Miigwech, Madam Chair. So, in response to Canada 150 and my request for us to take a formal united stance position on Canada 150. I was made aware by Marcy over the last day or two about the comments made in the Chief Circle and how it kind of took off on social media and apparently reaching over 120,000 people across the nation. And she was explaining to me, because I'm not that up on all that technical stuff with social media, how amazing it was to reach over 121,000 people. And I thought it was truly amazing, because I have a hard time getting my 3 kids to listen to me once in a while. But so in response to what I was talking about with Canada 150, a lot of my issues revolve around some of the things that I talked about on the first day, which are, the Human Rights Tribunal ruling, the issues of clean water, all the social problems that we face in our First Nations on a daily basis, and as chiefs, you all know that. And in my community, I can make a direct correlation with all these issues, and they all lead back to the broken treaties, to the implementation of the Indian Act, the residential schools, and Canada's 150 years of racially discriminating policies that they have placed upon us. In their response in that last 150 years to deal with these problems is to fund First Nations less than mainstream society. For the problems that they created, their response is to fund us less than the communities that surround us that haven't had to deal with the atrocities that they placed on us. That's how they deal with us. They fund us less. Insult to injury. Now, I also agree with some of the comments from the first day around the Chief Circle. Chief Kelly had pointed out quite eloquently that, this is a teaching moment. It is a teaching moment. And I respect that, and I understand that. And in fact, the Anishinabek is celebrating. We are celebrating something. But what we're celebrating is our resilience. We're celebrating our ability to resist a government whose agenda for the last 150 years has been to legislate us out of existence. But we're resisting. We're still here. And we're celebrating that. We celebrate that every single day, and we will be celebrating that on July 1st as well. Canada is in 2017 is spending $500 million on Canada 150. $500 million. That's a lot of clean drinking water, a lot of water plants, a lot of resources that could go to solve some of these problems that Canada created, but they're not spending it there. And there's one thing I learned growing up as a young man. If you haven't been paying your rent, you shouldn't be spending your money on a party. But that's what Canada's doing. So with that, I've worked with the staff and Patrick to come up with a statement on Canada 150, and it was passed around, so you should have it in front of you. And it reads, "This year Canada will celebrate 150 years since the formation of the Canadian state. This is a long history prior to and since this time with First Nations across Turtle Island. This history cannot and should not be forgotten. However, it should not impede finding a new path forward. The Anishinabek Nation government continues to extend its invitation to renew alliances and partnerships with the newcomers to our lands, represented by the Government of Canada. The Anishinabek Nation expects that a meaningful coexistence between the Government of Canada and the Anishinabek Nation must be based on mutual recognition, mutual respect, sharing, and mutual responsibility. Without the contributions of First Nations during the War of 1812, there would be no celebration of 150 years. Assimilation policies and blatant disregard for human rights and the inherent rights of the Anishinaabe peoples have caused unmentionable suffering, humiliation, and the deaths of countless people. Now is not the time for celebration, but a time for reflection, acknowledgement, and meaningful commitment to change these discriminatory policies and legislation. The settler governments have committed cultural genocide against our people. So, I guess what we are what we are hoping to do here is get unanimous acceptance of for Grand Chief to be able to convey that message and carry that message with him. So, miigwech.
Miigwech. So, all of those in favor of the statement, stand up. All of those that are not should still be sitting down, obviously. However, there's your answer, Chief McLeod, Grand Council Chief. And here's all of our work. Martin. 1, 2, 3 minutes, Martin.
Amigo Chavir. Ha, Mandanga Queen Badan, Mandan Governance Agreement. Home being Nindensi. Martin Dishnikas, Nilum the Sing Don Jaba. Nidus Need Badang, Mandani, and Governance Agreement, Megoi, Edemnamik, Zenagasan. So, what I've been asked to do is do a condensed version and report on the status of the Anishinabek Nation Governance Agreement negotiations. And right now, there's a copy of the presentation being circulated. I'd intend to put it up on the screen, but we're way behind, so I'll start the presentation and like I said, do a fast version of what is being distributed. And the other thing is, we've already made the same presentation to all of our regions, to the Southeast, Southwest, Robinson Huron, Robinson Spear, and we're also available to come to our First Nations if you want a full presentation along the lines of what's being distributed along with the PowerPoint. So we're available and more than happy to do that. So very quickly, because of these negotiations have been going on for a long time, it's often good to go back and reflect, where we all started. So this would have all started back in 1995. Our Grand Council Chief at the time was Joe Hare from Chaging, and our Deputy Grand Council Chief was Vern Root. There was a Grand Council resolution that was introduced and moved at that time by Chief Eugene Mantwabi of the Kwamkong Unceded Nation, that's what they were known as then, and then seconded by Chief Christy Purvey of Fort William First Nation. Typically in the governance negotiation processes with the federal government, there's 3 phases. There's a framework agreement, agreement in principle, and then we're right in the negotiation of the final agreement right now. So the framework agreement was signed in 1998 in Sault Ste. Marie, and then the AIP was signed in Nipissing in 2007. A couple things about how we get input and guidance from our communities and our Yimok and others. We established this governance working group, and over the years we've had a lot of good representation and good people from all of our communities, including this one. And in many of our communities throughout our 4 regions, I think we've had representation from every single one of our First Nations over the years. And the governance working group plays a key role in providing input and feedback, and also played a really instrumental role in developing and drafting the Anishinabek Nation Chinooks. We also are guided by a Chiefs Committee on Governance. It's made up of 8 chiefs with 2 chiefs from each of our 4 regions sitting on there, and our Grand Council Chief sits on there as well as the Deputy Grand Council Chief. And it's an opportunity to provide feedback on the progress of the negotiation of the governance agreement, and also to take direction and guidance from our Gimakan leaders that are on that Chiefs Committee on Governance. Over the years as well, we've had a lot of sessions. We had numerous information sessions and meetings in our communities with our community members. There was a document that was that's available, just been summarized a lot of the comments that our Anishinaabe people have been saying over the years, called the 10-year talk, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. There's a lot of good comments that have been shared over the years, including a means to an end. Like the agreements, for instance, the self-government agreements, the one in education and governance, that's all those are. Those are just agreements with the federal government where they're recognizing our lawmaking powers in certain areas. In the case of governance, for example, it's about elections and citizenship and language and culture and management and operation of our governments. And then with education, it's to have our own education laws. But they're just agreements. The real picture we're trying to fix is the one, and they're not numbers, but it talks about what's going on in our communities. The fact that our populations on reserve are growing real fast, and lots of younger people are forming the majority of Anishinaabe people in our communities, and with that comes all kinds of challenges. Gima Shining Turtle talked about the urgent need to have more housing yesterday, and it's a direct result of this population growth. And Gima Linda there, Tabaski, talked about the the importance of water and having clean water for our band members, through investments in water and sewer treatment systems, and ensuring that our band members will have clean water. Again, that's a direct result of the growth we're seeing in our communities, and the linkage between housing and having the water treatment facilities to make sure our members will have clean water and that we can treat the water after. It's been talked over and over again about the struggles we have sometimes to continue the use of our Anishinaabe languages, and there's efforts we're making in our schools to use more Anishinaabe languages, and that's really the real, I think, most important part actually of the education agreement, is a chance to educate our Anishinaabe kids in the language and also in our customs and our history, so that as they move forward they'll continue to advocate for the rights that we want to get recognized. Always been a challenge to create more jobs for our people. When people don't have jobs in our communities, and well-paying jobs, it leads to other issues in our community, some of the social issues we're struggling with, and the challenges we have in dealing with, with addictions going on in our community, for example, as a direct result of, not having meaningful job opportunities for these growing populations. And then major housing shortages, like Gima Shining Turtle talked about, and stressed to us the urgency of finding new and more innovative and more practical ways of responding to the housing shortages, instead of relying on CMHC or INAC to provide for our housing needs. Health, Jamie talked a little bit about the mental health issues going on in our communities, and the new, programs and options that are available to respond to some of their mental health challenges in our communities. But there's other things going on too in our communities that present real health challenges to our people. We all know of people that are struggling with diabetes, and we all know of people that we've lost to our families and our communities that have struggled with diabetes, cancer. There's this increasing prescription drug abuse. And often the treatment programs, to help our people are often expensive or not available. So we've got that going on in our communities as well. Although we've made some good strides in education over the years, where more and more of our Anishinaabe people are going to school and getting higher levels of education, by any standard that we measure the success of our kids, we're still behind the non-Anishinaabe kids that go to off-reserve schools, and we really have to do, everything we can to try to close the gap and make sure that our kids are doing just as well as the Zhangnash, or the non-native kids that go to off-reserve schools. And that's really what was behind the education agreement. It was all about improving the success rates of our kids. And then I talked about the need for more water and sewer treatment facilities. And then the other more recent issue we have going on in our communities is to have more information technology infrastructure, so that if we have a person in our community that wants to have a web-based business and has a great business idea, we have the related, wiring and all that stuff that comes with it, so they can take advantage of that opportunity. So how can we make things better and fix things? Well, I think starting with exercising more of our own laws, because without our own laws, we're always going to be subject to and dependent on other governments' laws, their funding and their priorities. Lots of examples of that. The old First Nation Control of First Nation Education Act that was brought by the department for consideration. There was the whole challenge we had in meeting the deadline to enact that matrimonial real property legislation, and so on. Legislation that is none of ours and not made by our governments, our Anishinaabe governments. So when we exercise more jurisdiction, whether that's through education acts under the Education Agreement or election laws under the Governance Act, or our own laws on our own inherent right and under our Chinooktagewans, this is definitely the way to go, because when we make our own decisions and our own laws, then we're going to have better decisions, because that'll ensure we produce better results, because now we're it, and we can't blame INAC for those kinds of decisions we make. The other thing that makes a difference is good governing institutions. That's why it's so important to have our own Chinooktagewans or constitutions in all of our First Nation communities. That's real power when you show up in court and you want to defend a law you made. It gives you the strength and the authority to say you had every right to enact that law and to implement it, as opposed to not having it, because it's one of the first things a judge is going to ask for. So that's important, governing institution. Also, having good staff to get the work done, separation of some of the business or management functions of chief and council versus the role of governing, which is, passing the laws, setting strategic plans, enacting regulations, and then also having our own effective dispute resolution mechanisms, whether they're tribunals, courts. We can build those all ourselves, because it never makes any sense to take, even this morning there was lots of discussion about taking things to court, non-native courts, whether it's provincial courts, federal court, or Supreme Court. I mean, that's all good, because that's all we have right now. But at some point, we should be taking our issues to our own, maybe Anishinabek Nation Supreme Court, just like what they do in the Navajo Nation. It only makes sense that Anishinaabe judges should be interpreting Anishinaabe laws, and we should really try to work our way where we're not taking things in front of a non-native court with a non-native judge that knows absolutely nothing about the issue we're trying to get resolved. So that's the thing that makes a difference. Our Anishinaabe culture is really important, so when we build things like our Chinooktagewin, our election laws, our tribunals, it's important that we build those in a way that's reflective of our culture, our language. Gordon talked about Ngudeonagizit Anishinaabe, our one Anishinaabe family, and when we took that Ngudeonagizit Anishinaabe into the lodge in Chiging, and our elders told us that that's an important part of our Chinooktagewin that was missing, and that's how that got added to the Anishinaabe Nation Chinooktagewin. So you'll see that Chinooktagewin is in fact very much reflective of our Anishinaabe culture. So when we do those kinds of things, our people will use them and will trust them and believe them, because they help to build them. And then one of the other final things that makes a difference in turning things around, and something we don't have, is a long-term strategic kind of vision, or where we want to see our communities in the next 20, 30 years. We talked about all the things that we have to fix, whether it's education, health, and housing, but we really haven't engaged in a real strategic thinking on setting targets now. And let's take education, for example. We just ratified, 14 of our bands just ratified the education agreement. There's another 13 in the wings that have the opportunity to come on board between now and August. But we still don't have a target. We know our kids are behind, but what's the target we want to achieve over the next 20, 30 years? Do we want to improve the success rates for our Anishinaabe kids by, say, 10% over 10 years or 10% over 20 years? Like, we should set a target and then all strive to achieve that, because that's what we promised our kids when we went out into those communities, that it would be a better tomorrow, and we would have better outcomes. And go through all those same indicators that I reviewed. What about housing? How many houses that we want to build over the next 10 years? I think this was the discussion that Gima Shining Turtle was trying to have. We know we have housing needs. Let's collectively maybe start some targets. And same with health. it's great to have all the different health options and the health agreements and our own health authorities. I mean, that's all great. But what are we going to tell our people? Like, what's the target we want to say, where we say something like, we would like to reduce the rates of diabetes among our people by blank. Like, let's set something and make it real and realistic and achievable. And then we're all working on singing from the same songbook. And same with jobs. So, moving right along here, just very quickly, what's in the governance agreement? This has been around a long time, and we've had numerous presentations like this already to our people. So I'll just go over this real quickly. So it's really about lawmaking power and leadership selection, so elections, language and culture, citizenship, some of the management operation type laws like a Financial Administration Act, some of the other things in the agreement. One of the GIMOC yesterday, or maybe the day before, talked about how we were always excluded from the federal First Ministers conferences. So it's kind of like by invite only. There will be a Prime Minister might call a First Ministers conference, invite the premiers of the provinces and the territories, but then we don't always get an invitation. So what we've developed in the governance agreement is our own intergovernmental forum for you right here, so that we can have our own regular ongoing forum to meet with not just INAC people either, but with the Government of Canada. There's a new fiscal framework agreement that's going to provide more funding over longer terms for governance-related functions. There's also a framework agreement for negotiating any future self-government agreements, and then the process on how the agreement will be voted on, which is the subject actually of some further discussion. If we're going to improve things, we need to measure things. So we need to have a framework for the collection of information from our band members. How are we doing in education? How are we doing in health? And so on. So we have to lay that all out on how we're going to keep information confidential, but where there's information that could be shared among ourselves and among other governments, we'll set that out as well. How our laws will be enforced. We're going to start with our own ways of resolving issues as well, and just not be a carbon copy of what goes on out in Sarnia, for example, where people are charged, they go to court, they get a fine, they get jail term, and then nothing's ever put back to balance there, and no harmony is ever restored. So we want to build on our own ways of how we traditionally resolved issues and disputes among ourselves and between our people and our governments. Under this new regime, any fines that will be paid would then be paid to our governments and not to municipalities or provincial courts. Finally, we're moving out of the Indian Act, but not all of it, just parts dealing with elections for chief and council, the ban lists, how council meetings are conducted. You all are very familiar with the problems with the Indian Act elections, the limited term of office, 2 years. It's just not long enough to get anything done. There's still too much power vested in the minister, and this will give us the opportunity to set our own election laws of whatever terms we want and whatever size and qualifications of those that are going to run for office of chief or councillor. The agreement includes protection for our Aboriginal treaty rights, so nothing in the agreement will be deemed to fulfill any of Canada's treaty obligations. There's nothing intended to take anything away from our Aboriginal or treaty rights, and it's not about treaty rights at all. What's going on right now in the governance agreement, there's really two pieces that we got to finish up. One is the fiscal chapter, because there's an ongoing national conversation now on a new fiscal framework agreement, so we're part of that. We want to see what the outcome of those discussions are and try to put together our best fiscal chapter within the agreement, so that's why that one's still being worked on. Chapter 6 is done. It's agreed to. We just have this technical working group comprised of lawyers from Justice Canada, Ontario AG, and our own. So hopefully they're not going to wreck that chapter too much. And then what we're doing this year is we're doing an independent review of how the education vote took place. So what were the things that worked good for us? What things didn't work so well? Because, I was at some forums where we didn't get a lot of turnout, so, it's some question whether we want to continue those kinds of sessions, and we want to really have in place, because when we take the governance agreement into our communities for information purposes and getting people informed on what they're going to be voting on, we want to build on the best practices that were used in the education process that took place last December. Then we're also doing a review of the education voting process. So there was a Schedule B there that was attached to the education agreement. sometimes the words in that in that Schedule B were helpful. A lot of times it didn't even make sense, but people were doing it because it was this Schedule B and you had to follow the words there, even though it made no sense in some cases. So we don't want to do that again, so we're going to do a review of that and take all the good stuff and practical stuff. Also, most importantly, both of those independent reviews will fuel the development of a comprehensive communication strategy so that we can take this information out to our band members so they'll know what this is about, they'll know when the vote is, they'll know how to vote. So we're going to do a communication strategy that'll give us the best practices on how to do that. And of course, this year we do have to finish this governance agreement, the fiscal transfer agreement, and the development of the implementation plan. And then moving right along, almost at the end here, we are going to do this year a long-term strategic plan. So we'll be engaging a firm or somebody to come out to our communities and start to talk about, what your visions are and what your targets are in some of these, areas that we need to improve for our people, the education rates, the health rates, more housing, better jobs, and so on. So we finally were able to get funding for the development of that long-term strategic plan this year, but it's going to be really made up on what the input is from our communities, because without our First Nation, there is no Anishinabek Nation. So, and then we'll continue to meet with our communities, our band members, our Chiefs Committee on Governance, regional chiefs, forums like this. And then also the other point I want to make just to wrap up is the importance of trying to get our constitutions done before the ratification vote of a governance agreement, because those are really powerful tools to govern ourselves going forward, especially that constitution and especially the laws that we might enact under it. So to wrap up, I want to just say Chimigwech. I was talking to Chief Rogers earlier and expressed how appreciative we were of the hospitality of the community here, Amjadong, and all of the people that have been providing, lunches and other support activities and having the lodge behind here. It was just so helpful. So I want to say Chimigwech to you, first of all, Chief Rogers, and all the people of Amjadong. And of course, to Chimigwech to all of you, Gimok, for listening to the presentation and taking time out of your busy schedules and being away from home to be here. Hamigwech.
Miigwech, Chief Paul Shkagan Zgamuk. Miigwech. We do have some continuing concerns around the work of the Governance Committee. And these concerns also come from my community's Governance Committee that we have reinstated. And they're essentially working on the same laws. Yesterday, we heard about the child and family law. Absolutely, we want full jurisdiction restored to our community in that area. No doubt about that. I think the concerns come from how do we get there and under what path. The same goes for our elections, residency code development, our own laws respecting membership and citizenship. Where we are concerned is when the work, at the Anishinabek Nation level, which was the chief's direct, is when we see the emergence of the inherent rights policy that the federal government has developed, and hasn't changed since its first creation. I believe it was in 1994. And that in itself is, I think, some work that I would like to see undertaken, some lobbying effort and some discussion with the federal government, because the things that I hear the Prime Minister, the Minister Bennett say, you know, it doesn't match with what their policy says. And this policy is what the bureaucrats are working with. And we've seen this most recently to my Robinson Huron Treaty Chief colleagues in our area. When we met in Garden River, I believe it was February, we seemed to, and I think we did, reject that notion of working under that policy or having anything to our work connected to that. And I think that work that we wanted to undertake in that area related to governance, I think the response from the federal government and its bureaucrats is that that's a problem, because they're only going to move as to what that policy tells them to do. So we've been seeing, I guess, the emergence of a regional level of government that we're creating. And we would like to see, before we move further, we really need to address that policy, because it doesn't speak to the needs of our community to be able to speak about the creation of any regional structure or law. We will be forwarding a resolution to the Grand Chief and to the chiefs, stating that for the time being that this restoration of jurisdiction work is not applicable to Sagamok. But we would like to open some dialogue about the work, but about how do we start to change that mindset of the federal government and what they're doing. So it's very difficult for me, I guess, yesterday when sitting through the discussion around a child and family law and knowing what our community wants. Abdiksagoyo ni de bedonan. Yes, we want that. But we need to have this discussion in the community about, first of all, confirming the jurisdiction that our community wants to give us in relation to child and family law. But also, at the same time, if we're going to create something else, what would you give them? What would they do for you? What do you want them to do for you? This is the discussion that we need to have in our community. And we certainly want to be a part of this as this moves forward. And a lot of the chiefs know we had great difficulty with the education piece. But that's moving forward. And it's prompted us to do work in our community. So we are developing our law around education as to how we see that unfolding in our community. And I'm hoping at some point in time we might rejoin. There might be a path where we can move forward together. But I think there's much work that we're trying to do in our community. And that other big piece, I think that we sometimes miss out on is we're doing this for our people. I understand that. But there's also something else that should take priority and want to do something for our people. And that's the healing that needs to happen. Abdikwa wene kui madzamin. Mananiking wijang. We have to be well when we engage in these kinds of important discussions at our community level. And that's part of our work that we're trying to do, is working with the people. And you know, we all have big issues in our community around healing. And I think that's something I think we can all agree on and work together, is to work with our people. Abdikugeno Wimniauk, Mananiking, Anishinabek, Madzuin, Geno, Wim Kamwat, Abdikuinad Magazok. So there has to be that, I think that that healing discussion, to be able to really talk about the future, on how we're going to take back a lot of this, what was taken away from us. We'll do it. But I think there's much work to be done with our people in our community. I think that's all we're saying from my community's perspective. And we certainly want to be engaged in the development of these other laws that we want to look at. So that's all I encourage. You know, some future work is, what can we do to start to influence the Liberal government to change that? I don't know, it's pretty old anyways, and it just doesn't match with what I hear them saying. Abdikwa, miigwech.
Aha, miigwech Paul. Nishinwe akidin. Da was amego ich bin zgomogego, ich bin you know, we not maga measure. Aha.
Miigwech, Chief Johnson. I had a difficult time yesterday too in regards to the child well-being law, and I want to state very clearly that Serpent River First Nation belongs to the Anishinabek Nation, and we will continue to belong to the Anishinabek Nation. That's who we are. I guess my concern stems along, and this is my own personal concern. It's not, we haven't taken it to the community yet. But I think the issue is around the whole issue of inherent right. And I want to just reiterate what the previous chief has talked about. The inherent right belongs to the community. It's the words that are in the documents that I have concerns with. And how do we reflect that and change that, the words that are in the documents, to reflect that the inherent right belongs to the community? I guess, and I agree wholeheartedly that we need to take back the jurisdiction for our children. And that, you know, even in regards to the elections, I'll say this much. We had to change our elections a couple of years back because of something that occurred. There was a protest in regards to the election. And so our elections were held in January. And a lot of our community members said, we don't want it in January. We want it back to what we had all the time. It has been sort of our history that we've had it in November. So we, as a collective of chief and council, had to decide that we would resign as a collective so that we can bring it back to that date. And so now I have to bring it back to the community and say, well, we're going to get involved in governance and we're going to align all our elections. I'm not sure how that's going to go because the community wanted us to bring it back to November. So I guess these are the kinds of things that, we struggle with when we're talking about restoration of jurisdiction, that some of these things rely on the community and there's history there. And so that's the struggle and challenge that I have in some of the discussions that we're having. But I agree with the previous chief because we did talk at the treaty meeting that we had in Garden River, and we understood that we were being forced by government to look at the inherent right policy, and that any funding that we possibly could be receiving would be the inherent right policy under self-government. And we're saying, no, that's our treaty. So this is the struggle I think that some of us are having, is because of the policies of government and where they're forcing us. They're putting us in a box. And then they say to us, and that's why I said yesterday that the government says, well, the Union of Ontarians has your money. And that's the challenge for us, because it's like, okay, we don't want to be competing with the Union of Ontarians, but we have issues in regards to treaty and we need to have those discussions. So I think that's the challenge. I see very much and I support wholeheartedly the Anishinabek Nation. I support, we are the Anishinabek Nation. So I just wanted to just put that there, and that's the challenge and the struggle I think that I am having and we need to have in our community and the discussions. So I understand, because I was just pointing out to my colleague beside me, we were looking at the resolution, and this goes back when the Grand Chief was Joe Hare, I think. And some of the chiefs are not even around that in the original resolution, so it's been a while, I guess, when you look at it. And so I understand that there's a process and we need to move forward, but there's still some challenges that we have to deal with. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
I guess so. It's always nice to talk after Elaine. She's such an eloquent speaker. Chief Shining Turtle of the Ojibways of Whitefish River. We did our MRP law on Whitefish River. We didn't have any difficulty talking to our people and writing down exactly what they saw in the law. And now we're applying the law. So that was pretty straightforward. We weren't afraid to have that discussion, and we didn't even need Chinook-Nagawin, because that came from our heart. So we've never been challenged on it. I know, Marty, you've said that you'll be challenged. We haven't been challenged, because we did it together. So I wanted to say this, though. In dealing with this governance, and it goes back to this 150 concept, so I'm going to back up to what the Chief of Nipissing was talking about Canada. The invasion and dispossession and subjugation of our peoples. That's what we're talking about with respect to 150. So when we wrestle with this, I think the difficulty we have is on one side, I think it's this, it's the institutionalized inequality. So the approach we're taking from the Anishinabek Nation is about institutionalization. And I think that's our wrong starting point. Regardless of how we frame it, it's still institutionalized. And it creates an inequality. And that inequality is bore out by the colonizers' relationship with us. And a colonizer's relationship by his nature is unequal, and one that benefits the colonizer at our expense. So if we're going to talk about governance, we have to move out of that institutionalized inequality and or recognize it and call those issues to task. For instance, the policy of inherent right. Can we modernize? Can we move away from that? And I know in our area we've been highly frustrated by the impacts of not being able to talk past the institutionalized box that we're in. It's very frustrating. On steps moving forward, I think some of the chiefs, we talk about this, it's a self-administration of the programming that we need. We need to build that capacity locally. And part of building that capacity is wellness or healing, right? And then education. And then you can get into the economy. I think we keep jumping too far ahead and we don't take that first step. So if I want to reach out to meet with you, Marty, I can't take one giant step. Physically, I just can't. I just cannot. But what I could do is probably take maybe 40 steps and I could see you. We have to be patient and put those steps into place. So we want to get to self-government, and then there's self-determination. I think we need to put in a third step, which is self-administration. Allow the communities to fill their capacity in the areas that they're talking about, with Sagamok, with wellness, Whitefish River wellness, education, and all these other pieces that come along. That might serve us well. Otherwise, we're going to have these arguments around this table about this institutionalization. And it's inequality on all of us, and we all recognize that. We just made a statement about that, about government and Canada 150. So that's the thinking I think we have to do, Miigwech. There you go, sir.
Miigwech, Gigdandek, Nego, Chechak, Dodem, Zgamak, Anishinabek, Kingani, and Donji. I asked permission to speak from my chief, and he said, go ahead, and he said, it's fine. I just want to remind the leadership, somebody had mentioned how long ago that resolution and how many of the leaders are not sitting around the table and how they've either retired or gone on. And it's really wanting to connect that in 1994, what was going on. I remember our chiefs along the North Shore, our 7 communities were engaged in what was called the community-based self-government negotiations. And that was the policy. And again, that was the federal policy that they came up with after the 1982 repatriation of the Constitution. They took our word, self-government, they turned around and said, okay, this is what it means. So they defined it in a policy that they thought the bureaucrats or their arms and legs of the government would go out with this understanding. And they did not recognize what we recognize as self-government. They really miss an opportunity to recognize what we meant by self-government, where they really limited it. And then, so again, government changes, and in the 1990s, they come up with what's called inherent rights policy. Again, when we were insisting we have an inherent right, and we knew what we were talking about. But what the government does, again, they define it. They create a policy that says, this is what inherent right means, and this is where we're going to put the resources. We're going to get the communities to buy into this process of negotiating a new relationship with the Crown, replacing the relationship that we've had. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, what's going to be required to recognize this is a piece of legislation. And to me, that really signifies or signals a new relationship that they may perceive that we have with them. We always perceive what we know we have, which is a relationship with the Crown. And we signed this treaty in 1850, and we have not had any process to reconcile that. But we are forcing them. We are forcing them to do some of the reconciliation through what we really don't like, which is through their court system. And what I'm talking about is a provision in our treaty that talks about the sharing, which is the annuity case that is going forward. So there are historic relationships that I believe our First Nation communities and leadership want an opportunity to sit down with the federal government and have those discussions based on what our spirit and intent of the Robinson-Huron Treaty is and what we've been told by the elders and what we continue to hear also. We don't have these forums in our area where we need to create these forums. And so we're jumping ahead when we haven't had a chance to talk about collectively amongst ourselves in a consistent basis what the spirit and intent of the treaty that our ancestors had signed, because we still have that same understanding. And this policy and the limitations of the policy doesn't do it in terms of what we believe is the spirit and intent of the relationship that we have with the Crown government. And by default, this is where I'm concerned that this work will replace that spirit and intent that we have with the Crown government. And that's my concern because of the way that the federal government has always recognized any time they sit down with us through an agreement that, okay, we've got a new relationship. That's my concern, and we really do need to ensure that our community members do participate. And what I was saying the other day was that the process doesn't allow for it in relation to resourcing the community work that has to take place in its entirety. I recognize that. I recognize that it is a limited resource process, and the Anishinabek, the Union of Ontario Indians, has done its best to manage that situation. But I remember sitting there at the very beginning, and our First Nation leadership, when that resolution was passed, said, don't go there. The policy is very limiting. I wouldn't go there, and I believe that either we abstained or we voted against it at the time for the union to proceed because of the limitations of the policy. And again, I'm just wanting to remind ourselves that there is some history, and that, again, to me, there's been some good work obviously done in relation to the research and all those things, but it's the negotiations part that really concerned me in terms of how the federal government has limited it's not true restoration of jurisdiction, but it's giving us some administrative abilities to manage our affairs a little bit better. But it's not replacing the original relationship that we had with the treaty, the spirit and intent of they living there, we're living in our own communities with our own laws and sharing the resources that are in our territories and benefiting from it economically. We're not seeing that, and that's what we need to see, which is why, again, the annuity case. Sorry for repeating myself, but I honestly do want to share some of the history, what we've come through. And yes, I remember being at the very first Chiefs Committee on Governance and saying and recognizing, okay, this is an exercise where we'll take their resources, see what we can do with it. But to me, if this is what we're ending up with and we're arriving at, it's not good enough. And that's what we need to say. Miigwech.
Am I done or?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Miigwech for your presentation, Martin. I'm going to ask then that Chief Muskokaman, Regional Chief, come and do his presentation on the gasoline and gas and tobacco and fiscal stability. And I'll say miigwech to all of the people that have served the food. And I'll try not to be like that lady at the restaurant and wait till your mouth is full and ask you whether you're for or against the resolution or you have comments. Okay, let's go.
Ani Bojo. Bidajmo Dishtakaz Bizin Donjba. Also known as Jason Laronde, with the Union of Ontario Indians as your Lands and Resources Director and your Economic Development Director. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds here before I pass it over to Joe, just to give you a quick background or a run through in terms of where we're going and what we're doing. Brendan right now, he's our Economic Development Policy Analyst, and he's handing out the memory key. This memory key was requested from previous regional chiefs meetings that we've had with the supporting documentation that we had passed out over the last year and a bit. So on there you'll get a summary report, a leadership briefing note, and the presentation that we would hope to have it on here, but in lieu of time, we'll have it as a backgrounder. And if you need us to come in your communities, and I'm sure Joel's going to echo it as well, as we're there on hand to come and visit you in your communities with this presentation. So just so you know, the Chiefs Council on Economy, they developed a plan on gasoline tobacco compact. So that was the mandate that we had moving forward from a resolution 2015-18. Part of that was to seek or support the Grand Council Chief and the Minister to create a bilateral table process so we can have the discussion on both tobacco and gasoline tax revenue sharing and support development of a regulatory framework for our communities. So basically what that says is the key elements of this potential framework derived from the Chiefs Council on Economy, the regional chiefs meetings we had. We had a think tank in Toronto. We had various responses coming back, and we have some elements or principles that we want to drive forward to ensure that what we're trying and striving to do is clearly trying to benefit our communities as a whole, and that includes everything from the retailers to the economic stimulus that we need in our communities as well. So again, the no taxation on our own community members, considerations to ensure First Nation retailers' competitiveness, incentives built in for retailers to ensure long-term stability for First Nation retailers, and adequate participation. Legalization of tobacco trade in First Nation community, that's talking about a First Nation brand. Identify a solution, data collection, and tracking tobacco and trade issues. First Nations will determine the regulatory taxation framework. We want to build that. And First Nations will receive from Ontario revenue sharing from the existing taxes that are on there. So that's what we're striving to do. There's a whole bunch more on there. That's just a peripheral on where we want to go. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe now so he can give a little bit more detail as to where we're headed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, Madam Chairperson. First of all, I'd like to recognize that we're in the territory of Anishinabek and Miigwech for welcoming us. I also recognize the bundles that are in front of me. And I'd like to say that we've been to every region. I know that we haven't been and met with every council and so on. It's just been a cramped time. But let me assure you that what we're proposing is something that is really quite a seismic shift in what we've been traditionally doing. The whole issue here is really talking about thinking outside the box. We've heard people talk about, okay, how do we think outside the box? And I compare this really to something that we did, was led from the Anishinabek Nation back in the mid-'80s. And that was to gain a hold of some of the revenues that were within the gaming. as it was being developed within Ontario at that time. And as you heard from Elder Leroy Dawson and confirmed his positioning back with the OFNLP, in which you'll be going tomorrow to listen to the presentation of the Board of Directors from the OFNLP. I asked Leroy this week how much money has actually come from gaming into the First Nations within Ontario. And he told me yesterday that from 2008 to currently, approximately $950 million has gone into our communities. That was a seismic shift at the time, to put gaming into a community, into a First Nation community, or into two of our First Nation communities, and then later on, in 2008, negotiate a position of 1.7% of all gaming in Ontario, not just from the one casino, but for all gaming in Ontario. So this is a model that we've have seen and done before. On resolution, as Jason said, 2015-18 of June of 2015, the Chiefs Committee on the Economy was mandated to create a compact between Ontario and Anishinabek Nation for gasoline and tobacco. In September of that year, 2015, Grand Council Chief Pat Madabi and I met with Finance Minister Charles Susu from the Government of Ontario, who agreed to begin those discussions. From that point, what we had to do was really have a situational paper. Where are we as of today? So we contracted a consultant that went out and looked at what were the tax revenue sharing agreements from both Canada and into the United States. We looked at the current levies of taxation and fuel from both federal and provincial governments. And the conclusion of that was that we estimate, and I think this is a low estimation, that we estimate as of today, there's approximately $23.4 million of gasoline tax that is being put back into the provincial coffers, that is generated from our First Nations. I think that number is low. And the reason for that is that when we challenged the government for the last year on quantifying how much money they were actually receiving from First Nation retailers on gasoline, at the end of the day, they could not come up with a substantive figure. They did not know. As interesting as that may sound, from the Ministry of Finance, they could not quantify how much gasoline tax was actually being derived from the First Nation. They also estimated that there's $281 million annually of tobacco tax that is being generated through the provincial portion of the taxation going back to the province. That is generated from non-First Nation members buying tobacco within our communities. There alone is over $300 million that our retailers are generating that goes directly back into provincial coffers. The discussion paper that we had contracted for, recommended at the time, and the stick that you just got, because we've heard from the First Nations that papers get displaced and misplaced. Those papers have been handed out before, so we decided to put them on a stick and combine all those papers together. Those papers on that stick will be this presentation, will be the briefing note behind this presentation, will be a one-page summary, which was sent last year, and will be the entire discussion paper that was contracted. And so what the discussion paper came back with, and the suggestion is that we should adopt the New Brunswick model. And the New Brunswick model is simply this, that New Brunswick taxes all people from First Nations and returns back to the First Nation 95%. It also points to the fact that it's a software program that is developed at the point of sale in order to track the products, and what is used for the exemption purposes is the Indian status card. The discussion paper was not acceptable to us because there were flaws and there's weaknesses within the process that we believe is in New Brunswick. It does not, in our view, shift the jurisdictional responsibility from the province to the First Nations. In essence, the communities become the tax collector for the province in New Brunswick. We believe that that model does not restore jurisdiction for tax revenues back into the First Nation communities. And the most flawed of all of that is because when New Brunswick started out on a 95% return back to the First Nation, it was not in legislation, it was in a regulatory basis. New Brunswick has now shifted that model, and now the First Nations are getting 70%, not 95%, and the province is retaining 30%. A major flaw. We believe that this piece of work needs to be embodied within the legislation and not within regulations that government can shift on us at their choosing. Ontario has tabled a proposal with us, and you've all heard it because the ministry people have been at your regional meetings. And we recognize that many First Nations already and have admittedly already imposed some form of levy. It may not be as great as being proposed by the province, but most First Nations, I shouldn't say most, many First Nations already impose a levy of some form on commercial tobacco products. Therefore, the province of Ontario has come back with a proposal that would put a levy of $25 per carton on the tobacco product now. They also have proposed that if that $25 per carton levy goes on, that they will also provide up to 10% of the gross revenues of tobacco tax within Ontario. The total tax in Ontario collected off of tobacco is $1.2 billion. 10% equals $120 million. Their proposal, as you've heard, Ontario does not intend to have First Nations collect a tax. The 10% government share would come to those First Nations that would participate, that it could be used as the community chooses, but they would recommend, and it's a recommendation, not an imposition, that the community could put this towards social program, economic development, investments, or other community priorities. That this money that would come in would be new source revenue and would not impair the existing dollars that you're receiving. And what they want to do is they want to have the price differential somewhat lowered off than is currently now. Currently, just after the new budget that was tabled in February by Minister Suso, it included a tax increase on tobacco, and currently tobacco is being taxed at the provincial level at $32.95 a carton. So there would be a difference between $25 and $33 almost. We have heard from the Anishinabek leadership through our regional meetings, and the principles that we have taken from that will be that the First Nations will determine the exemptions on tobacco products. We recognize that there needs to be competitiveness for our vendors. That if you have a tax too high, what's the sense of going to a First Nation? It would cost too much to get there. So there has to be some weighing in on how that would be taking place. We have not made any determination whether or not $25 is on the table. That's simply their proposal. We haven't weighed out the economics of it. So we can't agree that that is a price point or not. We've been collecting information at this point without agreeing on what has been put on the table. We believe that there needs to be a phasing in to whatever price point we would negotiate somewhere down the road. That the First Nations must have the jurisdiction to determine price points. That 10% of the overall gross revenue for tobacco tax in Ontario has to be there, because what we're going to have when we have small communities that are out of mainstream, out of the roads, off the grid, it really doesn't mean a lot to them. So what we need is to use that 10% to have some equalization taking place. Now, we haven't come down to what that formula may or may not be, but we do understand that some communities that are off the road system, the main road system, will require some equalization. There are some issues that we need to address fairly quickly. As pointed out earlier, that in order to embed the price points within so that can't be changed on regulation, we need to have legislation. There is a very small window of opportunity for legislation to take place. The legislative calendar is essentially full and almost closed. We believe that in order to hit that framework, we need to start working to have legislation ready by March of 2018. There needs to be a requirement of 6 to 8 First Nation acting as proponents for the legislation. And we need to identify the tracking of tobacco and gas revenues on this issue. The tracking issue is not that difficult, but this still needs to be developed. What we have forward in front of you, or which is going to be presented, is a resolution from this Assembly to work together to draft an agreement in principle so that the Anishinabek Nation that have interest in lawmaking and revenue generating related to jurisdiction over gasoline and tobacco may do so from a position of strength and coordination. We would work together to draft the provincial legislation recognizing First Nation jurisdiction and to work with Ontario to collaborate or collectively engage, and they've already agreed to this, to collectively engage with the federal government with regard to tax revenue sharing with the Anishinabek Nation communities as it pertains to the federal excise tax on gasoline and tobacco. And what that means is that the federal excise tax is around $22 per carton. We're attempting to get that returned also back to the First Nation by working with the federal or the provincial government to place some responsibility on the federal government for those taxes also to be returned. That, Madam Chairman, is the presentation.
I want to say miigwech for the presentation, and as Joe has mentioned, there's a resolution. It's called Gasoline and Tobacco First Nation Jurisdiction Revenue Generation. It's being moved by Chief Tom Brissett, and it's being seconded by Chief Scott McLeod. It has a number of whereases, and that information is what Joe presented. And it says, therefore be it resolved that we, the Anishinabek Chiefs in Assembly, direct the Anishinabek Nation to develop a draft agreement in principle so that Anishinabek First Nations that are interested in lawmaking and revenue generation related to jurisdiction over gasoline and tobacco may do so from a position of strength and in coordination. And 2, direct the Anishinabek Nation to work towards drafting provincial legislation recognizing Anishinabek First Nation jurisdiction, and 3, direct the Anishinabek Nation to work with Ontario to collectively engage the federal government with regards to tax revenue sharing with Anishinabek Nation communities as it pertains to the federal excise tax on gasoline and tobacco products. So Chief Brissett, would you like to speak to your resolution?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair. Chief Tom Brissett, Chippewas, Kettle, and Stony Point First Nation. You know, we've been chasing around the area of resource sharing with this government for a long time. And all the time we've approached this issue, we've been denied. And I think we've had an opportunity for one of these governments to start to recognize that there is a sharing of the wealth that they're generating off the territory. And I know there's many First Nations across this country that do exercise tax jurisdiction, and many of those communities that do are doing very well. They've got big shopping malls and all kind of employment opportunities, and they've got businesses operating in our communities, office buildings, they rent spaces out. So there's a lot more to be had than just gasoline and tobacco off of this. I think this is an opening of the door process for us to go after federal resources and any private resources that have not come to terms with treaties that we have. So I'm moving this resolution because I believe we got to take in a forward step and stop just depending on the Indian Act to provide what we need. The Indian Act has fallen far short. Auditor General's condemned that document several times, condemned a lot of things. We're getting academic supports now. People like John Ralston Saul, that wrote a book called The Beginning, talks about turning back Canada and starting on a sharing process of which we agreed that they could come to the country. So I think it's an opportune time for us to advance this issue while we have friendly governments sitting at the table, because I'm sure if the Conservatives come here, they wouldn't give us a dime out of anything, and they'd probably start to try and eliminate the tax exemptions that we already have. So I believe we got to start to open a door in this area and start going after these in more aggressive fashion. So that's why I'm moving this resolution. Miigwech, Madam Chair.
Chief McLeod.
Miigwech, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to just say miigwech to Joe for all his work on this, and for taking the time to enlighten me on some of the finer details surrounding it. So I will second this resolution, but I also have to make it clear that you know, this, I have a community that I have to speak in behalf of, and we have people in our community that have businesses that that this could directly affect, and in no way are we moving forward into fully accepting this, but what we are what I am willing to do is support the ongoing work to see where this goes, because I believe that there is a diamond in the rough there somewhere, and I think with further work we may find that. So having said that, I do second the motion. Miigwech.
Chief.
Chief Ed Wawe from Red Rock Indian Band. I believe wholeheartedly in going after government for sharing tax revenues, but I cannot support anything that would possibly lead to a taxation or a levy on any of our First Nation business or our people. I appreciate the work Joe Muskokomen and others are doing on this, but if it's going to lead to taxes on our people, I cannot support it.
Thank you, Chief. Is there any other comments on the resolution? Chief White-Eye.
Ani, Chief White-Eye here from Chippewa the Thames First Nation. Chippewa the Thames put a proposal forward to undertake this work in 2011, and we earnestly began the work in 2012. So we've been in this role working with the provincial government on this exact topic for 4 years. In the 4 years, we built our capacity in terms of lawmaking, but also in terms of understanding exactly what it is that we're dealing with here in terms of the sector. The sector, it's fully entrenched, as you know, in our communities. And in that, there is a particularly opportunity here for folks to take advantage of a sector that may not be as robust as it could, you know, in the future years, that if we take advantage of this now in terms of the timing of the provincial governments and the willingness to sit down and talk about jurisdiction in this area, it's going to open other doors in terms of all of those other sectors that eventually could become entrenched in our communities, but we have no way of getting any return from those. And right now, there is enough of a gap that I think we can sit down with our retailers and we can sit down with our vendors and we can talk with our members and we can say to them that there's enough of a gap there that we can work together where the nation also benefits, where there are a return where the nation collects a levy as well as a gap revenue for the vendors themselves. Now, there's still more work to be done in terms of what that looks like, and we're prepared at Chippewa the Thames to figure that out in this coming year. But the matter of the fact is that we're getting and focusing in our relationship with the provincial government as one of the pilot projects on this very topic, along with Akwesasne, that there is a window of opportunity that will talk about jurisdiction, and it won't be simply a regulatory change, as Regional Chief Joe Muskokaman explained. So there is, I think, there's a real benefit here. But what I'm trying to compel you to think about, everything that we've talked about today, everything that we said we're about in terms of jurisdiction and self-regulation, well, that's really the hard work here. You are asking, through this pilot project, Chippewa the Thames has been doing the work on the ground, building our capacity as a community to understand what lawmaking is about. So we're in that development. We've developed an anti-smoking bylaw that will support the regulatory framework. We are developing an agreement with the people to talk about the wealth distribution part of the framework. We're developing the law in terms of enforcement. What does it look like when we're enforcing our own tobacco regulation in the community? Those are tough things to talk about. But if you're talking about self-government, then that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the responsibility side of your rights-based agenda. So, but that's going to take time. And so we're even as a result of that work, we've learned about ourselves as a community in our readiness. And that has to take time. And I think I echo what Chief Shining Turtle said earlier about this governance agreement framework. We're learning that in this pilot project. We have to take our time to work with our people, help them to understand, and help ourselves as leaders on what it is we're undertaking in lawmaking and jurisdiction development. This pilot project did this for us here at Chippewa. And we're prepared to come into your communities and share all of the information that we have in the development of this pilot project. And we're also prepared to share anything we produced in terms of getting our ducks in order to move into an agreement in principle with the province this year on what that could look like. So the model that was just proposed to you is the model that Chippewa the Thames has been working on for 4 years. And so we're quite prepared to do that, to share with you what that work entails. And it is lots of work, and it is a community-based approach. And so I guess what I'm asking then is a friendly amendment to the agreement, or to the resolution, sorry. I'm asking that you could add a point number 4, that the Anishinabek Nation agree to undertake a formal information exchange with Chippewas of Thames First Nation and Akwesasne, who are currently in pilot projects, to strengthen the framework development.
So that's the wording that Chief White-Eye would like to be included in this resolution. And if that's okay with the mover, is that okay with the seconder? So Chief McLeod, Chief Brissett, they're good with that. Thanks, Chief. Chief?
Bonjour. My name is Duncan Machado from Beektegang. I would support the issue in regards to gas taxes, but I'm going to have to say no to the taxes for cigarettes. In Beektegang, we have a policy in trying to encourage our people to stay the heck off cigarettes because they're a health issue. And I don't want to be collecting taxes from a product which we are telling our people to stay off of and encouraging them to stay away from it. So I had suggested that we separate these things, but because they're together, I'm going to have to abstain from voting.
Thank you, Chief Machado. Is there any other comments, questions on the resolution? It's been moved and seconded. Question's been called. All of those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? See a few. Would you like your name recorded? Yes? What? Okay, 2, 3. There's one over here. Yeah, 4. All right, thank you. We'll have those names recorded. We're going to move right along because I need you to stay in this resolution mode. And because we were always asked that what have we done for the youth, I'm going to invite Chief Shining Turtle to present his resolution. And it's resolution innovation youth engagement. It's being moved by Chief Shining Turtle, seconded by Chief Linda DeBoski. A number of whereases, and therefore be it resolved that we, the Anishinabek Chiefs in Assembly, direct the Anishinabek Nation to seek support, plan, organize, and facilitate an innovation summit for First Nations youth, and direct the Anishinabek Nation to develop a plan and framework for the creation of an Anishinabek Nation Innovation Center. So, Chief Shining Turtle.
Okay, I'll start right here at the front desk.
And you have a minute to speak to your resolution.
I got a minute to convince you that we should do this. Okay, so let's do this. I want to remind the Assembly that our theme was honoring our past, present, and future. So I want to talk about the future. We spent a lot of time talking about the present and yesterday about the past. Our grabber is that we have inadequate employment opportunities that exist for our youth. Our subject is innovation and entrepreneurship and in youth engagement, and we need to empower our young people through innovation, training, and education. Innovation, training, and education will provide opportunities for young people to adapt to a changing labor environment that includes innovation. Key points I'd like to tell you that inadequate opportunities exist for our youth, and you know that. Another key point, youth need to be prepared for the future of industry, and the labor market trends are showing that technology is that way. 3, we currently don't have a system in place that promotes innovation and change and entrepreneurship. There simply isn't a PTO in Ontario that's taking a lead on innovation and change, and you know what? The Anishinabek Nation should take the lead on this. And we should create a portal within the Anishinabek Nation that is driving innovation and change. That's about our young people. Let's talk about the future. I implore you by consensus to make this thing happen. Miigwech. Aha. We're done. 1 minute, 38 seconds. Woohoo! Are you satisfied, Madam Chair? I don't want to grovel at your feet. I'll throw gravel at your feet.
It's okay. We're from the same clan. I'm glad you listen. You behave. So, question is called on the resolution, innovation youth engagements. Moved and seconded. Questions called. All of those in favor? Miigwech. Opposed? Abstentions? Carried. Miigwech. Chief Phyllis Williams, Chief Kelly Larocca, Anishinabek Nation, Ontario Archaeological Society Working Relationship Protocol. It's a number of whereases, and they're resolving that, therefore it be resolved that we, the Anishinabek Chiefs in Assembly, support the creation of a relationship protocol between the Anishinabek Nation and the Ontario Archaeological Society for the purpose of locating, protecting, and returning Anishinabek Nation ancestral remains, sacred artifacts, and traditional knowledge to their rightful home communities. So it's moved and seconded. Would either one of the chiefs like to speak to the resolution? Chief Phyllis?
Just real quickly, I think this is an area that all touches our hearts, the remains of our ancestors and our sacred items. I think it's important that we have this working relationship and formal protocol developed with the province. We continue to have issues in our communities and those areas that are being developed, and sometimes it's very difficult to make our voices heard. So I think with the Anishinabek Nation behind this and developing that protocol, it'll just make us that much stronger. Miigwech.
Comments, clarification on the resolution? Questions called? All of those in favor? Way up. Opposed? Abstentions? Carried. The last resolution, it has to do with First Nation inclusion in Ontario contract and procurement processes and support for a procurement specialist position. It's being moved by Chief Wayne Machano. He was right over there. He's still over there. And it's being seconded by Chief Edward Wawiya from Red Rock Indian Band. A number of whereases, and that it therefore be it resolved that we, the Anishinabek Chiefs in Assembly, call upon the Ontario government to update its legislation concerning tendering and procurement practices to implement requirements for contractors retained by Ontario to employ qualifying First Nation applicants belonging to the territory where development is occurring, and to direct the Union of Ontario Indians to develop a position paper for presentation to the Ontario government that outlines the needs of the Anishinabek Nation and identifies the language within the governing provincial legislation that requires updating. 3, direct the Union of Ontario Indians to engage with Ontario in the updating of legislation concerning tendering and procurement practices of development opportunities occurring within First Nations traditional territory. Direct the Grand Council Chief to advocate to secure a procurement specialist position in the North Superior region to support communities through the procurement processes and generating community assets inventories. A bit moved and seconded. Would either the mover or seconder like to speak to the resolution?
Bonjour, Chief Wayne Sabin, Pickmo for Cities. I just want to add, because we're missing opportunities of gaining employment on roadworks in our territory. They always put these barriers in place. They call for Aboriginal procurement, but they don't give us procurement. We have partnerships with the contractors in the area, and we would like to get these jobs. That's why we're pursuing this, and we can't get in the door. There's always these barriers that they put up. So this, what the government announces, has no teeth. You know, the contractors still can come in and do what they want to do. When we have equipment in a community that's not being idle and not being used, when you see a contractor coming from a different area and using their equipment in our territory. So we don't just want the flagmen anymore. We want real work in our territory. Miigwech.
Questions called. All of those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Resolution is carried. Miigwech. I'm going to invite that Peter Mesenheimer. You have 1 minute to address the Assembly. My greatest apologies. I know you've been here for 3 days and waiting for this 1 minute chance. Well, here it is.
Then I will refrain from showing off my very limited skills with Anishinabemowin and cut right to it. I was, a year ago, the Chiefs in Assembly passed a resolution and reiterated it again in the Fall Assembly, telling the Anishinabek Ontario Fisheries Resource Centre, of which I am General Manager, to do work and bring back to the Assembly a report on the work that would advance a revision to the mandate of the AOFRC to expand the range of subjects in the natural resource sphere in which we could provide services to the Anishinabek Nation and the communities of it. We have been doing work. I won't attempt to summarize it all today, There is a questionnaire that has been circulated here. It's very brief, and I would ask those of you who have not yet got it to Heidi at our table to please do so before you leave, or give it to Leah and she'll get it to us. I would also ask you to work with us to allow us to speak to you either individually or collectively about this. We have an election happening in Ontario in a year. It is very likely, it seems, that there will be a change in the political landscape that may not work to the advantage of an initiative like this. And I think time is of the essence in getting this done. So we will be in touch and be seeking your advice, your counsel, your input, your criticisms on this going forward. And hopefully we can get this done in a quick and effective way. So am I under a minute? Chimigwich.
Thank you, Peter. Miigwech for that. Chief Shining Turtle really wants to talk about Resource Management Council, so he's going to have a minute to do that. Chief Shining Turtle. Right behind that, I'm going to invite Sherry Brandt. She's going to come and address Sovereignty Wealth.
Sovereignty and wealth will be dealt with in 30 seconds. Okay, so good afternoon, Grand Council. The Resource Management Council, I'm the chair of that organization for the time being. We have Arnya here and Jason, who are doing all your technical work at the Union of Ontario Indians, and they are very good ambassadors for the program. There's been a refocus of the Resource Management Council to be technically based, so on resource management issues, and I'll tell you what it isn't. The issues of treaty jurisdiction and authorities requires another table. Those are issues that are being raised by First Nations like yourselves, and they have to be brought to the Grand Council and other tables found. We're just dealing with the very straightforward technical issues like aerial spraying, trapping, those types of things that are really at a very low level, because it's just dealing with the ministry guidelines, so that's very low on the table. Your issue about treaty, jurisdiction, and authorities, we really need to set up a separate table for that, because that's what Nipissing's talking about, that's what Mississauga's talking about, that's what Sagamok's talking about in terms of where we go ahead with our nation building, and that's not really that table. So this is just some technical work that's been refocused for you. I'm the chair of that. If there's questions that arise over the coming months, me and Ed are on that, so we're happy to help you. Miigwech, my minute's up. Next.
Miigwech, Chief Shining Turtle. And we also have a pair of glasses up here. If you're missing them, we have them up here at the front. I'd like to invite Sherry Brandt to do the agenda item, Sovereign Wealth. Sherry?
Chimigwech. Hi, everybody. My name is Cherie Brandt. I'm with a law firm called Dickinson Wright, and we are the legal counsel assisting the Chiefs Committee on Energy establish what's going to be called the Ontario First Nations Sovereign Wealth LP. There's a presentation in tab 4, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it. We don't have time to do that right now, but what I do want to say is that the contact person at the Chiefs of Ontario is Amy Lickers. You're going to find a communique that will come out very shortly that's going to explain about the process that we're going to move through in order to get to closing. The closing outside date is at the end of this year. We're looking to actually have a closing whereby First Nations have the opportunity to purchase up to 2.5% of Hydro One. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm sorry I can't take you through all those details, but we will have webinars available. There's all of the information will be accessible. And I know that Jason and both Brendan, your resource people, have done an excellent job meeting within the regional meetings and taking the chiefs through this information. So if there are regional meetings coming up, we would also be available to come and attend at those meetings. Chimigwech, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Sherry also is going to be at your meeting up in Chiefs of Ontario in a little while. I'm going to ask then that Deputy Grand Chief come and do his closing remarks. Deputy Grand Chief Glenn Hare.
No, miigwech, wave, gumanang ko tagos, and I'll be quick, but it's going to be honest. Well, again, chiefs, miigwech, it is our forums like this where we hear our stories and the direction that's provided here that inspire and motivate and affirms the work and the meetings that have to be done. I welcome the encouragement and the renewed sense of determination to represent it to the very best of my ability to transform these stories, these experiences, and hopes and dreams that I hear here today. And as I travel to our communities to those future meetings that I will be involved with, and also throughout my travels, again, it is my greatest joy to the Deben Dauzijik, to the citizens, the number of engagement sessions that we get involved in, myself, especially with the powwows, the meetings, the community celebrations, and stopping along the highway, but also meeting and talking to our homeless. As we heard the youth here yesterday speak out, and he hit it right on the head. No matter what the struggles our citizens have, drinking, drugs, whatever it is, chiefs, they are somebody's son or somebody's daughter. We should never forget that. It is a shame that they're embarrassed to come home. We need to fix that somehow, because they belong at home. Our lands and resources, again, these are our rights. These are the rights, the very rights that we will now and we will in the future fight vigorously on your behalf. All the lands and resources issues that we heard here from our elders in the last couple of days, they are the very meanings, the ideas, even though there was only about 5 or so that shared the microphone with us, but we're on the right track because everything they've said, that's what we're pursuing. And we'll pursue them harder when we meet any government, be it the sitting government now or the future government. There are certain areas that I feel the Anishinaabe needs to prepare for also, and that is the legalization of marijuana. We have been struggling with drugs in our communities, and now this is coming to the face of our people. We need to, so much now, come together a year from now, because truthfully, I do dread that day when that becomes legalized. Too much services in our communities, young ones. So we need to come together a year from now to address that somehow. And again, our right to protect our own children, and no one else. No Rangnash has that right, only us. And we heard all too well already too many times over the past few weeks. Let's remember them 4 girls that died in care. These are only the ones that we hear of. There's many more that we don't hear of. We need to explore better solutions to match our families who are waiting to be approved for foster care with those children who are in dire need of a good Anishinaabe home. Again, we and only we can approve a nice Anishinaabe home for all our kids. We do have a nice place for them. No more in someone else's vehicle. Again, in my travels too, I hear a call for determination to push, to reclaim our Anishinaabe. The Creator gave us our Anishinaabe. And it is that very fact, because why we're pursuing our own education. There's nobody else doing it for us. If we weren't doing education right now, Grand Chief and I and the past chiefs, we would have been getting heck for not doing anything at all. While we're doing something, and we ask that we support the Anishinaabe with the communities that are on board now, and the door is open to the rest of all 40 of our communities. We need that language to start with, and it's in there. And recognize our teachers, give them the right and the authority to award certification of success and to our graduates to get that paper from a First Nation teacher, not from a Jaganash. So again, the determination, we've seen that in the elders here, and we hear it from the youth, and you hear it from myself also, and the chiefs here, all of you chiefs. We have the determination, and we have the heart, and we have the passion. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it with unity. That's the only way to do it. That's the only way to achieve it. Deben Dausjik, our citizens here with us and that are on the webcast, that's what they want to see also. They want to see us move ahead because they are our leaders. They're going to take over sooner than we think. So there is so much going on that I hope will result in good things happening for the Anishinaabe Nation. I welcome our people taking the active role in heightening and awareness of that education that we speak of. Our people at the grassroots of our communities are too busy. There are many missions that are being pursued. There are many more obstacles and barriers and inappropriate actions being challenged. Racism, violence, discrimination, and the impacts of our environment. I am grateful to the movement that we are seeing. I assist where I can. There is a demand that is growing to reclaiming our traditional lands and the true governance structures to get to the confines of the Indian Act, and to action a desire to get back to the land-based learning. Our communities, when we talk about the incidental cabins, it is you, the citizens, you are the ones that are asking and asking if you can build incidental cabins to go and enjoy the lands up there. I too, and with Grand Chief, we encourage you to get up there. We can build them incidental cabins and we can enjoy the forest, all the land up there, anywhere. Don't ask for MNR permission or anybody or Jagnash. We have that right. And we will stand with you if somebody stands in your way. That's awesome. I hear here today all the work, the governance, and Marty's presentation that they support. We support each other to move on. But when the communities are ready, our arms will be open for you when you're ready to come on board with us. We cannot throw all this work away that we've done in the 30-some years I've been involved. Too much money. Money that has done good things for us. So with that, again in my travels, I want to say Chimigwesh to each and every one of us here for the ongoing support that we have. Our prayers also to the shut-ins, because I know we have a lot of shut-ins, and I hope they're listening, and those who can't. Let's think of them. It is their passion why we're still here. They started all this. They wanted us to be leaders and to have everything, to own everything. And I see us doing that now. So let's do it for them. I know they're watching, and they will hear what we're doing here. So with that, again I say Miigwech, on behalf of Grand Chief and myself, we'll see you at all the powwows. These are things that we want to do. We're not being forced. We don't do it for any less or any more. We need to connect with each other. The Deben Dausjik have to connect to each and every one of us chiefs. We got to leave that open. Open mind. And let's go out there. We have to, in the middle of the roads again, we will. Border crossings, we will. So again, Chimigwech, each and every one of you, safe travels on your way home, and I will be there to deliver some more donations to your communities, and that's a promise. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Deputy Grand Chief. Grand Council Chief Patrick Madabi.
Miigwech, I want to just mention a couple things real quickly. Miigwech to the folks that attended here, for our Deben Jaujiks, our citizens, those on webcast. Just a quick shout out to Elaine out there who called in about firefighter issue. Arnya is going to get in touch with you. This issue has been looked at. We've got a response on that, and we have made representation. I have received a letter back from the minister on that. You know, she's been pleased to send that message along to the Central Firefighting Agency, you know, that recruits the firefighters. You know, I think Arnya will get another letter out just to remind them, you know, that fire season's is up on us already, and we need to engage our First Nation firefighters wherever we can. We got lots of work to do. Chinook Nagawans need to be done in each of our communities. We need to build our own structures of governance and our own laws. I'm not going to get into a big discussion on it. We've talked about it a lot. And one of the most important things we got to do is work on our citizenship law. Ibn Dawjajik. That's going to be crucial, you know, to strengthen who we are as Anishinabek. There was a discussion earlier today about people that are lost. They belong in our communities. And I want to also point out we've begun the process that was mandated last year at the Grand Council about engaging our urban citizens. We have an Elders Council, a Women's Council, a Youth Council, and we're working on establishing urban councils. We have to engage our citizens no matter where they live. So we've begun that process. We've been talking to the folks in Toronto already. We have another big meeting coming up with them, and we plan on going to all of the major urban centers where Anishinaabe reside. We've had a wonderful time here in Amjanang. You know, I think I've gained 10 pounds from the excellent food. The hospitality has been phenomenal. I want to say chimigwech to everybody, the chief and council, and all the citizens. They've been all very welcoming. The fire keepers and the people that were involved with all the ceremonies. Chimigwech, especially, you know, again, the drum is back, and we say chimigwech to the drummers and the singers here for starting us off and for closing us off. I also have a gift here for Gimakwe Joanne Rogers. If she could come up. A new card? No, it's not. Sorry.
I just want to say, it always falls out when I come here. I just want to say, on behalf of my band council in our community, thank you, and to the union as well. Thank you for letting us host this assembly. I've learned so much from each and every one of you. I want to thank all my staff, the drummers, the cooks, everyone that was involved in helping us prepare for this assembly. Chimigwech to all of you and every one of you. Safe trip to Toronto. I think we're all meeting in Toronto after this, so safe travels. Miigwech.
Thank you. Just in closing, engaging our community citizens is going to be so crucial to all of the work and effort that we talked about here this week. So really talk to your families and talk to your neighbors. Whenever there's meetings coming up talking about these very crucial issues, you need to be there to listen, give us your input. What we put on the documents is your direction. We're not sitting back there writing this stuff up in an office. It's got to come from you, the citizens. It's your communities, it's your First Nations we work for, and we need to hear from you. So please come out. With that, chimigwech, safe travels, everybody, and we'll see you when we see you.
We'll get yourself ready to do the closing. We're going to have Elder Pauline to do the closing prayer. Now, there's a number of surveys I think that we're asking you to finish up and bring back to us. But I want to say miigwech to all of you for all of your work, and Arnold and I have certainly appreciated being of service to the chiefs in assembly. I want to acknowledge the work that Arnold does, and for Quinn stepping up and helping us with an awful lot of the ceremony part, and certainly made our time here in this community and with this leadership absolutely incredible. So we're going to ask that Pauline will come and do the...
In the rush to get out, I forgot to say Chimigwech to our two co-chairs. Thank you, Vera and Arnold. Chimigwech.
Just for closing, I'd just like to say miigwech, especially for the child well-being law. It was great to watch that law come to creation with Adrian and social services over the years. And I'd just like to say miigwech for the youth, for the elections in the past, and continue to have your youth council developments in your communities and to keep engaged. Speak to your chiefs. There's a lot that's going to be happening recently soon, so please share your voice within your chief and councils. Miigwech.
Kshemnido, spimming ein, kwetmin gomino, wewe ne mampi, Anishinabek, abajajik, denigiot, nagdoe nem genejat, denedikushnoat, o den daat geno, mage nguchip kanejagwen. Chimigachi, kino moyang mampi, bekabzinchejik, kino moyang, nunchkonagego gashinondmang. Chimigach, das kinagwegdago, chimigacheko. Kinosugagego kamishwebak. Chimigach, kitigom. Hagi no migach kitak. Migach, miigwech, miigwech, minani, miigwech.
Miigwech, I'd like to thank Pauline for that Thanksgiving and closing prayer. I'd like to thank our co-chairs. We'd like to, we've asked Homeland to do a Retire the Flag song and then a traveling song. So we'd ask you if you could pick up your flags and line up just at the entrance to the inner circle. Yeah, and anybody who wants to carry a flag, I know we have extra flags, so we'd invite you to come out and carry out a flag for us. Just line up right for the entrances. Right. for more flag. Oh, sorry. Looking for more flag carriers yet? There's still several flags up here, so feel free to pick up a flag and honor our flags by bringing it out. We're still looking for a few more. I count about 5 or 6 left here. Well, look, some of the staff are coming over. Still need just a couple more. Okay, we still need about 4 more. Okay, it looks like we've got our flag carriers, so miigwech for everybody has volunteered. So I'm going to turn it over to our drum and I appreciate their participation in the Grand Council. Homeland is going to do a Retire the Flag song and follow it up with Welcome. So Homeland.
Yeah.
Miigwech homeland, so hope everybody has a safe travels home. Miigwech.